Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I wanted to finally give you guys a Valkyrie review because I got the character to tier 2. I've been playing around with her quite a bit in Shadowland, in World Boss, and Extreme Alliance Battle. I just finished practicing and using her with Wolverine in Combat Extreme Alliance Battle, so I have a better understanding and a better picture of where the character fits into the overall value of the game and why you should or should not get Valkyrie. Now, keep in mind right at the beginning that she is a paywall character. She is not available through biometric selectors through any kind of farming. You can get her for 2,500 crystals in the cinematic battle for Valkyrie that you use her in, but aside from that, if you don't have those crystals, you're going to need to get a biometric subscription, which is the $10 or $11 purchase that gives you 20 bios per day for 30 days. So there's no other way of getting her, so you need to initially value the character based on that cost. But once you get into that and you want to know whether the character is good or not, I have the following insights to offer you. I think that Valkyrie is an above average paywall character if we're going to compare her to the likes of Hyperion. She's better. Ironheart, she's probably a little bit better, but maybe not as good as the top tier paywalls. Agent Venom, Enchantress, and Spider-Man 2099, who is the pinnacle of the paywall characters. She's arguably about as good as Enchantress for different reasons. I think she does more damage than someone like Enchantress. She has obviously less crowd control than Enchantress, but then she has other peripheral tools that make her a very valuable character in certain circumstances. Of course, because of her tier 2 passive, that's very similar to Coulson's passive, she immediately becomes very good for any World Boss Ultimate or any Extreme Alliance battle where she's applicable. So you can use her with Coulson in Extreme Alliance Battle No Restriction Day. You can also use her on Combat Hero Day with Wolverine or another character. So she immediately gets that value above any of the other paywall characters because she is a strong support character. But in her own right, I think she is a good character. I would say she's above average. She's not going to impress you incredibly in any game mode, but she can definitely hold her own. I think her strengths include, lots of iframes. She's got debuff, and she's got summons, which will take the heat off because they do have a health bar. They do take aggro, or they take aggression from the enemy. And I think that her main weakness is survivability, because even though she has those iframes, her defenses are lacking. She doesn't have super armor. She doesn't have damage reduction. She doesn't have a heal. Her guard hit is very short. It's only 5 hits for 3 seconds, so you barely notice it. And when she takes a hit, as I said, because of her defense being low natively, she takes a lot of damage. So she can, be killed with just a couple of hits. As far as her skills go, I'm going to show you them now while I'm talking about them. Her first skill is just a basic iframe with a jump through. The jump through is very nice for dodging things like Thanos' beams because you can start in front of him when he casts it and you can finish behind him. Very similar to Spider-Man 2099's third skill. Her second skill is the one that you're going to use to initiate most of your skill rotations because it applies that guard. And the guard and the defense there is important for her. If you let the skill cast, if you don't cancel it, you'll see a Pegasus, or you'll see a horse come at the end, and that will apply a 2-second stun. So the stun happens at the very end of the skill animation. Good for Shadowland, bad for stuff like World Boss. Her third skill is another jump through Step of the Goddess, and very similar to her first skill. I can't really tell the difference aside from a few sword swings. This skill is particularly good for Shadowland because of the massive minus to all defense that it applies to the enemies. Doesn't work in World Boss, doesn't work in Extreme Alliance Battle, I think. So only really prioritize this skill at all in Shadowland or in a game mode where you can actually apply those debuffs. Her 4-star passive is nothing to write home about. Her fourth skill is very good. It's an iframe with a lot of damage and a lot of AoE. I think this is the skill that you should prioritize to use on a damage proc if you're using a damage proc obelisk or CTP. And then finally, her fifth skill, Army of the Valkyrie, still can't pronounce that word, is the one where she jumps up, she has an iframe, she summons a bunch of summons, horses with wings, and then they do damage. The stun happens at the very beginning of the skill, so it's good for Shadowland even if you cancel it. The horses or the summons come partway through, so you have to be careful not to cancel it too early. And then keep in mind as a warning that the beginning of the skill does not have an iframe because she initially summons her ride, her horse, and so there's a bit of a wind up about a second or less where she's completely vulnerable to damage. As far as her leadership, again, nothing to really talk about, 11% dodge, whatever. But as far as the skill rotation goes, I would say for World Boss, and you will see later in my Infinity Thanos clear that I use this rotation, you should go with something like 2 cancel, 5, 4, 1, 3. I put an asterisk on 3 because it's situational. You can use it if you want extra damage or if you have a place to use it, or you can just go right back into her second skill. Most of her skills have a pretty short cooldown. You know, this is 4.5 seconds, 4.5 seconds, 3.5 seconds. Very short. For Shadowland, I would prefer to start with the third skill because it has that massive all defense debuff and it helps her just crank out even more damage even faster. So I would do something like 3, 2 cancel, 5, 4, 1. Those would be the rotations that I would go for. I wouldn't use her as a primary character in Extreme Alliance battle, so you don't have to worry about that rotation. But I guess if enough of you wanted, I could try to use her as a solo character in Extreme Alliance battle to see how she does. She can probably hit 100,000 quite easily because she's buffing herself up with her tier 2 passive. She has clones that will do additional persistent damage, and she has that AoE with Aura Sword, but I don't think she's going to do much better than maybe Iron Fist or Moon Knight or someone kind of in the middle tier, kind of lower middle tier of Extreme Alliance battle. As far as her Uru goes for her gear, I basically don't want to suggest whether you should go offensive or defensive. I would prefer to go offensive on the Uru and defensive on the Obelisk, but I'm going to give you both options. If you wanted to go offensive, I would say physical attack plus crit damage and crit rate is fantastic for her. She only gets a small amount of crit rate from her skills, so you're going to have to build up the rest with her Uru and with her Obelisk. If you wanted to go defensive, I think it's better to max out her HP first because she has an above average HP for a combat character. So I would go physical attack and double HP, and then the fifth one I would go for either dodge, or if you need something like ignore defense, I would go for that. As far as the Obelisk goes, I went with a mixture of mostly defensive stats with some offensive. Crit rate is good for the offense, but the 5 seconds of invincibility is what I think she really needs. There is some argument to be made about immunity to guard break immunity, but she does have a lot of instant iframes with 1 and 3, or 1 and 3, that make that a little bit questionable. So I can't recommend guard break immunity, but it's something to think about. You could go with invincibility, or you could go with something like crit damage and a damage proc, but you have some flexibility depending on whether you want to build your Valkyrie offensively or defensively. As I mentioned before, you can't farm for her BIOS, but finally we do come to the ISO 8 set. I don't think there's much argument to be made here. A healing set or a bubble set is really not going to provide much protection for Valkyrie. I think your best bet is to just kill the enemy before they kill you. And because your clones will not benefit from the heal stats of your ISO 8 set, aside from the all defense, which is very minor, you're much better off improving the damage of your clones because she summons so many of them. I think it's 4 or 5, that if you boost your damage, it's basically being multiplied by 5, that boost, because of the summons each drawing from that pool of all attack boost. So I would recommend, of course, Power of Angry Hulk or Overdrive primarily, but you could try to squeeze in Hawk's Eye if you have very low skill cooldown or if you have very low gold. The HP Uru is not bad, or the HP ISO 8 is not bad, and you know, we can't all roll for Overdrive on every character that we want. Overall, I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning, that she is an above average paywall character with a very niche role as a support character to buff up your main DPS a la Coulson, a la Warwolf, and others. Because of that reason, I think that she's going to become popular among the more competitive players, but I don't think that as a standalone character she would have gained that much popularity or that much use if it weren't for her tier 2 passive. So I would caution new players or players who are trying to copy who they see at the top building their characters. I would caution them to be careful with tier 2ing someone like Valkyrie. She's a good character. She's definitely a lot better than Coulson if you're going to compare them to those two in a vacuum, but in terms of her overall value as a paywall character on that scale with Spider-Man 2099 and others, she's not at the top. She's definitely in the top 5, but she may not be better than 5 for certain situations and overall. Finally, I want to show you guys how she performs in World Boss against Infinity Thanos with no leadership, no strikers, nothing like that, so you can see and take a look at her damage, skill rotation, and how she fares against those mechanics and that game mode. So basically, you just want to establish the clones the summons as fast as you can, because they're going to take away aggro, as I mentioned earlier. And if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of the... Probably turn the quality down so that you don't see those effects. This is a quick run though. This is pretty good damage, and this is no leadership. This is just using her own tier 2 passive, which massively helps against villains like Thanos. But if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of the beam, Thanos's laser hands, just use your third skill or first skill defensively so that you can dodge it. Yeah, and then use your second skill to set up your fifth skill, as I mentioned, because the fifth skill does have a gap at the very beginning. But as you can see, we're a minute in and we're already mostly dead. Her damage is good, that much is true. The only thing is her survivability, I think. And it is a bit of a question mark. I also don't think she's as good as characters like... I'm in trouble here. Big trouble here. I also don't think she's as good as Miguel, Spider-Man 2099. So she's got a very I can't move. She's got very big shoes to fill with that character. Another thing that might make this run difficult is the fact that the horsies will... I'm in big trouble here. The horsies will take aggro like that, so if you have them up... I actually got scared of dying, so... If you have the horsies up, you can't kick Thanos out of the meteor attack. Oh, that's bad. Ah, I just died. Well, that's also a perfect example of the fifth skill and how it has some gap. Oh, mini Scourge review. We'll get to Scourge soon. Come on, Carnage. Finish the job. Oh boy. But that's a good example. I couldn't get a great example from the clips that I was showing you earlier, but that's also a great example of how her fifth skill, Valkyrie's fifth skill, has some wind-up. And if you don't have protection when you're casting her fifth skill, awesome feathers, you will get punished. And I actually died there because the fifth skill doesn't start as an iframe. It's not an instant iframe. So I hope that this clear, mostly Valkyrie solo of Infinity Thanos has been helpful for you guys. I hope that the review has illuminated the character's strengths and weaknesses, and that you can make a better decision about whether you want this character based on this review. Because if nothing else, this review should answer the question, does X Marvel Future Fight player want to invest in Valkyrie as a tier 1 or as a tier 2? I hope you enjoyed the review. Subscribe if you did, and of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.